Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar that we have in store for you. We have today the NFIP 2.0 risk rating, Maryland's coastline, and how realtors can be a resource. And today for this topic, we have Kevin Wagner, Community Assistance Program Manager for Water and Science Administration at the Maryland Department of Environment, and our friend from Fema, Richard Sabota Sr., Insurance Specialist and Regional CRS Coordinator. Joining them to talk about this topic is our CEO for Maryland Realtors, Chuck Caskey. This group had a very popular podcast and they want to go more in depth for our viewers today and listeners. And we're very excited for a very invigorating topic. And Chuck, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dan. That was Dan Petrell, everybody. Thank you for that introduction and welcome, everyone. As Dan mentioned, this is Risk Rating 2.0, and everybody knows what flood insurance means. Now we just say flood, right? We don't even say NFIP, we don't say flood insurance, realtor community. All you have to do is say flood. How we doing on flood? So we know that this is a topic that is continuing to be of substantial interest to you all and all of our members. And one of the reasons, first of all, the reason we're timing this so close to the release of the podcast is that April 1st is an extremely important date for everyone in the program. And we're going to talk about that in a second, about why that's so important. Secondly, Maryland, some people, when you travel around the country, people don't really understand Maryland all that well and they think of us as a really small state. And I guess on the map, we look small in tucked away in the East Coast and bisected by the Bay and the Potomac. And it's a strange shape with the Mason-Dixon line on top. But, we talked about this at the beginning. How much coastline does Maryland have? Why is flood insurance so important in Maryland? And it's because of the enormous amount of coastline we have. If you search for how much coastline does Maryland have, you're going to get a lot of different answers. Every page you go, you will get a different answer. It's anywhere from 3,000 or just over 3,000 to over 7,000 miles of coastline. So it depends on what you count. And we'll talk a little bit about that. These guys, both Kevin and Rich, will a little bit. But when you think about the Atlantic and the Bay, of course, all the tributaries, the big ones, the Severn and the South River and the Susquehanna, and then the Potomac circling the rest of the western part of Maryland. So if you think about it, it is thousands and thousands of miles of coastline. And with that, of course, in these days comes the risk of flooding. And all you have to do is walk downtown Annapolis to know that flooding is an issue here in Maryland. So we are very pleased to have Kevin and Rich with us. That's why we're here. That's what we're going to talk about. And the Q&A is open. We will take them as you post them. We will take those questions. So please type away and make sure that all your questions are answered. Toward the end, we're going to talk about resources. NAR has partnered with Fema. MDE has a lot of resources these guys are going to talk about and even show you some. And then we'll finish with a few parting words and additional resources, because your clients are going to really want to know what's up with flood. So Kevin, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. First of all, I just want to thank you and the Maryland Realtors for inviting me today, and Rich as well. Rich is a wealth of knowledge related to flood insurance, so we're really fortunate to have him in Region 3. But again, thank you for the invitation. So my name again is Kevin Wagner with Maryland Department of the Environment, and we are the state coordinating office for the National Flood Insurance Program. So what I thought I'd do to start is to kind of set the stage a little bit, give you some of the background on the National Flood Insurance Program. Hopefully that's not new to you, but in case it is, we'll educate you a little bit on that and kind of take a little bit of a dive into the mapping aspects of it and really the floodplain management. And that's really important. And how realtors, I think, can be a part of that. I mean, certainly you're working with clients, they're being informed that they're in a flood risk zone, there's certain things they need to do. But you know what, there might be some things that they can do to a structure to help reduce the cost of flood insurance. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, Chuck, if you can confirm that you can see my intro slide.
Yes, we can. Yeah,
Okay,
yes, we can hear you.
All right.
You can see that. Thank you.
Because once I go to presentation mode, I can't see anybody. So
yeah. Okay. Right. No, we can see it fine.
All right, great. So I'm calling this the National Flood Insurance Program, a flood risk reduction tool, because it really is. But again, I'm with Maryland Department of the Environment and have been for almost 22 years now. Time flies when you're having fun, but I was in the private sector for a few years before that. But really, I'm involved in almost anything flood related. You know, I kind of use this hashtag MD Flood Guy. But I get calls about, you know, properties and mapping and insurance and floodplain management. But I am in a group called the Stormwater Dam Safety and Flood Management Program. So that was a recent reorganization that happened in our department. So there's a big focus on integrating this with other things in our program. So not just quality, but also quantity. All right. So a little bit of background about the National Flood Insurance Program, or the NFIP. It was created by the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968. And, you know, when I did some research on this early on, you know, so there's major disasters that happen throughout our country, but the impetus that really started to get things going again to create this National Flood Insurance Act was Hurricane Betsy that happened in 1965. Now, there's been several amendments to the program since then that have further strengthened it, but that was really the start of this sort of national floodplain management program. It is administered by Rich Sabota. I'm just kidding. It's managed or administered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Rich is one part of that. So they are under the Department of Homeland Security, and we work with the FEMA regional office out of Philadelphia, of which Rich is a part of. But participation in this thing is really voluntary. It kind of is, but it kind of isn't. But it's kind of a quid pro quo thing. You know, you community do this, and in exchange, flood insurance is available. But there are other benefits to being in. So in addition to flood insurance, communities have access to grants and loans, disaster assistance. But we tend to only hear about the, you know, the insurance from mortgage perspectives when it's mandatory and it's required, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of stuff that has to happen even for it to be available. So I'm going to touch on it briefly for you. So again, it is a partnership between the federal government and the community. But the NFIP is kind of this mixing bowl of things. It's not just one thing. You have the maps and data that are one piece of it to understand what the risk is. And there's debate on whether or not that's accurate or not. But the other bigger piece of it is the regulatory aspect that the community has to do. But also I'm going to touch on some of the mitigation related things that you all could maybe help out with and help your clients with. And then of course, flood insurance is really the foundation of the program. But again, there's kind of these things need to work in sync with each other in order for the rates to be reasonable, for the risk to be lower, and that sort of thing. So what do I mean by community? Community is really any state or area or political subdivision. So think every county throughout Maryland and any municipality that has land use authority is a community. We have 147 of them in Maryland. So that's all 23 counties in Baltimore City and 123 municipalities. We even have some municipalities that don't have a FEMA flood map risk, but are still participating communities so that folks within that jurisdiction can purchase flood insurance from the NFIP. So there's about 13 of those. Maryland is also considered a community. So we're not exempt from following the rules. We need to make sure any kind of things we're doing at the state level also meet the minimum federal criteria. So the community has a big role. They have to adopt regulations and enforce these regulations. They use the maps for the development review process and issue what I like to call floodplain permits, but really it's a part of their suite of permits anyway, like a building permit. But you know, they have a big responsibility here in kind of implementing and enforcing and doing the actual floodplain management. But we're here as a resource to them as the coordinating office. So we work closely with the communities, we work closely with FEMA, And that's what brings me here, with you all today. I am part of this community assistance program. So we provide technical assistance, but our department is also actively involved on the update of the flood insurance rate maps. So that is just something that we have been doing for, oh my goodness, probably close to 15, 20 years now, when map modernization first started and they started to take paper-based maps and make them more GIS or geographic information system based. Our department also has a role because we do a lot of regulatory type stuff, obviously. So we do regulate activity in the 100-year non-tidal floodplain. So sometimes people might have to get a permit from a local government as well as from our office. But we work with a lot of different people. These are just a small sampling of them. And I realized I forgot to include the Maryland Realtors on here. So, you are a partner as well. But the point is that it's a lot of agencies. It's a lot of, nonprofits and private sector folks that we work with as well.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, I'm sorry. That box at the bottom, I think if you just hit hide.
Oh, you still see that? Okay,
yeah,
I'm
try
sorry.
that. There you go. Good job. Thank you.
I always get nervous about clicking those buttons during the
I
presentation.
know. I was going to get that. Oh, please don't.
Blow up. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
So to give you an idea of what kind of policy numbers we have in Maryland, we have about 65,000, and they are spread throughout the state. Now, obviously, some of our coastal areas like Ocean City along the Atlantic coast there, we have about, 27 or 28,000 policies there, but the rest are spread throughout the state. But this provides over $16 billion in coverage. So it is a big deal to do this because it's tied to a lot of things with regards to lending and reducing risk. So I'm going to quickly kind of step through two of these components, the maps and data, which I affectionately call the know your risk category, and then we'll get into the floodplain management. But I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Rich to talk about the insurance aspect and also risk rating 2.0. So as far as the maps and data go, you may or may not be familiar with the flood insurance rate map. This is the tool that we use for floodplain management and permitting purposes. And up until April 1st, it's the tool that we've been using for flood insurance rating, but things are going to be changing a little bit, and Rich can touch on more of that later. But the community uses this when they do permit review. But they can adopt other lines theoretically. They could look at high water marks, they could look at sea level rise projections, or they could use some other data that I'm going to show you. But there's certain limitations with the firms. They don't necessarily show you where all flooding can occur. It just meets that certain standard, that 1% annual chance flood, or that 100-year flood that we often refer to it as. The other limitation of the firm, it does not take into account future conditions. So we're not thinking about climate change. We're not thinking about sea level rise or land subsidence. It's just based on what was current and historic when that study was published. So I just want to make sure that's clear. All right, so the types of floodplains that we have in Maryland, I like to group them into these sort of three different categories: non-tidal or riverine, tidal, and coastal. So I'm going to show you kind of examples of each one of those and kind of quickly go through that, but there's different zone sort of designations with that. But what you need to kind of keep in mind is the high risk zones are the ones of most importance. However, the moderate risk zone, that X shaded, the 500-year 0.2%, that's also one to be aware of. But the mandatory purchase requirement up until April, well, still after April 1st, will be based on those high risk areas. So that's the A zones, the AH, AO, AE, and VE zones. So what does that look like, Kevin? Okay, well, I'm glad you asked. So A zone in a non-tidal scenario, it looks like this. It's just like a blue blob. So I'm showing you an example from our outreach website, but this is pretty standard on any kind of mapping platform that you're going to go to. So it's generally that blue area, it just has an A. There's no elevations tied to it, so no base flood elevations. As we step up a little bit, you get into an AE zone. This is Ellicott City, the downtown area on Main Street. So you can get a sense of what the regulatory floodplain looks like. In the orange area is that 500-year or 0.2%. So there isn't a mandatory purchase requirement there, but it's always recommended that anybody purchase flood insurance because flooding can occur anywhere. And Rich, what's the mantra that FEMA follows? Anywhere it rains, it can flood. You have your
Correct.
umbrella.
Perfect. You've learned well, Grasshopper.
Yeah. Okay, and then there's this other area. It's a little more technical. I just wanted to point it out so you're aware, but you might see this sometimes on a map. It's an area called a floodway. It's where the water tends to be deeper. It moves faster. So that's that hatched area on the map. And there's special regulatory requirements in floodways if you're doing new construction, substantial improvement kind of a thing. But it's still in the floodplain. It's still a high risk area. It's just if you're doing some development, it might add some steps. From a tidal perspective, I picked the downtown area of Annapolis, so hopefully that Ego Alley looks familiar to you. And I'm going to use this example in some other mapping I'm going to show you, but same story. It's got the blue shaded areas, the 1% annual chance flood or the 100-year, and those orange areas are the 500-year. Now, as we move to our coastal areas, and I'm showing you Ocean City, I think this is the Princess Royale on 91st Street. It's a little different. You got these velocity zones, and the modeling that FEMA does on the coastal side is different than riverine. So it's a lot of factors that go into it about wave run up and how that wave intersects with the shoreline. But this just gives you a sense of what that looks like. Something quickly I wanted to point out is this thing called a limit of moderate wave action. And it doesn't quite get to the level of a V-zone. V-zone, when they do the modeling, it kind of has this 3-foot wave that's kind of a part of it. And that's what sets the base flood elevation. So like, for example, this VE zone 14 includes a 3-foot breaking wave. So that's how they do it on the coastal side. But that wave doesn't just stop magically at that line. It does here because there's a dune system and there's all this mapping criteria they get into. So I'm not getting all that, but if it was a traditional, wave interface with the shoreline, obviously that wave just doesn't stop at a line. It dissipates the energy as it moves inland. So what FEMA started doing is mapping this line called a limit of moderate wave action. And it's basically where wave heights can get up to 1.5 feet. So you'll see it as this black line with flags. So if you look at this in profile view, if you're Ocean City isn't a great example because I don't have a limb on the coastal front, but if you just kind of imagine yourself standing on the beach looking down towards the inlet, you got this V zone that kind of happens, the wave breaks, then you got traditionally an AE zone behind it. But the limwa is where that wave height gets up to 1.5 feet. And this is something important because on a regulatory side, if new construction's going in, new structures might more than likely are going to have to follow this kind of open foundation system on piers or pilings. So kind of keep that in mind. But where do I get all this information? There's a couple different places you can go. You can go to MD Flood Maps. We have a flood risk application there, so you can interact with the map, turn the layers on and off, and then type in address, whatever you're comfortable with. But there's a lot of data, and you can also produce a map like this and download it if you'd like. FEMA similarly has what's called the FEMA Flood Map Service Center, and there is just a ton of information on there. So not only can you get the effective mapping, you can also find historic mapping products as well as a lot of other things. But very similarly, you can also kind of do these firmettes, they call them, flood insurance rate map et, and you can download it as a PDF or PNG, but it shows very similar information. There's another viewer you could also hit on FEMA's site. You can type in your address and it'll give you this national flood hazard layer. Point is, there's a variety of ways to get the information, and we're trying to make our symbology very similar to what it looks like on FEMA's mapping system. So all the blues are blue and the oranges are oranges and all that kind of stuff. Okay, I want to take a couple of seconds or minutes to talk about other sources of flood risk data, because as good of a job as FEMA tries to do with the flood insurance rate maps, we know that flooding occurs outside the boundary. So we have this thing in Maryland called the Coastmark Climate Ready Action Boundary, where we've taken the FEMA elevation and added 3 feet to it. And then let's see what it looks like when we go out. So I'll show you an example of that. And then also this thing called flood factor, which is used by realtor.com, and just a really neat source of information to kind of help illustrate what that future risk could look like. So for the crab, again, it starts with this sort of medium blue area where you get the Fema, but we add 3 feet to it, and then we go out horizontally 3 feet and then see where that impacts on land. So I use an example real quick in Anne Arundel County here. Here's the traditional FEMA flood insurance rate map. The blue area is still that 1% annual chance. The hatched area is not floodway. It's just showing you where it's over top of land. But as soon as we start to add the crab, it's interesting because then you can start to see where that water surface elevation creeps into the neighborhood. So the purple is where depths are greater than 2 feet. The green is 1 to 2 feet, and then the yellows are less than a foot. So as you click around on this application, you can get different elevations of the ground surface versus the depth of flooding. And it really is helpful because it might help your client say, okay, well, you're not in FEMA's floodplain, but you might want to consider, elevating this structure, even though you may not be required to, or you might want to consider installing flood openings or whatever, or elevating electrical and mechanical equipment. Of course, we can add a lot of things here. We can add building footprints and start to do some analysis and all that kind of stuff. So that's just kind of a quick preview of that one. That is also available on MD Flood Maps. We'll get you a link to that after this. The other one I want to highlight real quick is called Flood Factor. And I'm sorry I'm rushing through this. I just want to make sure I have plenty of time for Rich to do his piece on risk rating 2.0. But flood factor, it looks at future risk. It kind of uses a variety of models. And I've been very impressed with it, to be quite honest with you. I've kind of looked at different areas around the state, but it is used by Realtor and Redfin and Estately, and they assign a score, like a 1 to 10, 10 being, most at risk to flooding. So if you go to realtor.com and you click on, I'm sure you all have done this, you'll click on the property and you'll see the FEMA zone as well as the flood factor rate. And you can really interact with this, and it'll actually lead you to, getting a quote on flood insurance. I think Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, is the one that underwrites this, has that partnership. So they have a lot of experience with this, but really a kind of a neat partnership that happened. I thought I'd give you kind of a comparison a little bit, what some of these things look like between the FEMA and the CoSmart. So again, the FEMA is like the regulatory stuff that we use for, floodplain management purposes. So when we add that crab, where does that line go? And you can see that it starts to creep up here in the downtown Annapolis area and enter into the neighborhoods. I also wanted to compare it to flood factor. And I'll toggle between the two here a little bit so you can see, but it's kind of interesting to me because flood factor is pretty close to like the 500-year floodplain, so they're indicating there's still some level of risk out there. And even with our CoSmart crab, the purple area is close to the 500-year as well. So anyway, just want to show you a couple of those different sort of tools that are available. I guess I'll pause there for a second. If we have a minute or so for questions, Chuck, I can take a question up to this point, and then I'll move on to the next section.
I don't see any questions so far, Kevin.
Okay.
If anybody has anything, it's a lot. So everybody, first of all, we know this stuff, and there's a lot of terminology. There's a lot of information coming at you in a short period of time. So we do record these. It will be available. The slides will be available. The resources are there, all those links. So really today is a time to get familiar with how to get these resources. We know you're not committing a lot of this stuff to memory. Yeah. So this is big picture, we just want to lay the ground, the foundation for you. But as obviously our role in the transaction is to make sure that our clients have access to the best information and where to get that. So there are a lot of resources already that Kevin talked about. Rich going to give you some more. I'm going to give you some more. And we did get a question about where to get more information. So on the slides will be links and contact information in terms and email addresses and phone numbers. So there will be a lot of there will be ways for you all to get whatever information you need, and you can always reach out to me or Dan to help you navigate this. Okay.
Absolutely.
So I did get one on the chat was phew. So that, yeah, we understand it's a lot, but we want to make sure it's all out there, and then we can help you, kind of get through it. One question just did come up, Kevin. Let me see. Oh, it was answered. Okay. Oh, it was in the chat. Excuse me. Let me just check one more time. Okay. So my friend April, hey, April, I haven't seen you in a long time. Home is owned free and clear. They don't have flood insurance and unsure if the lender will require. If it's in 100 years, is that a trigger? What should we be looking for on properties we don't know?
Yeah, so if they're free and clear, there wouldn't be a requirement for flood insurance, but we're always going to recommend it, because the risk is probably still there. So that would be our recommendation.
Yeah, now we've talked about that a lot in the podcast. We talked about it because there's mandatory insurance if they don't, the lender doesn't require it, and that's in the A zone and a couple other zones potentially. But there's no reason to not have it because your homeowner's insurance is not going to cover it. And so the question is, how do we prepare for resales? And I think that's really one of the main points we want to make here is that we're going to provide you with the links, with the information, with a whole lot of resources. At the very end, we're going to give you links and everything to additional resources. The purpose is so that you can give that information to your clients so they can make informed decisions. Okay, that's our message here to our members. We don't expect you to become experts like these guys, but we really do want you to have at your fingertips the resources to provide to your clients, not to make them decisions for them, not to tell them what to do, but to say, here, this is really good information. Here's the link. Here's the resources. Study this stuff. Know what you're up against. Make an informed decision, whether you need it or not. Obviously, if your lender requires it, that's another issue. But if they don't, you may still want it, and here's why, and here's a bunch of resources that you can use to get that information. Most importantly, to make sure your client has the information they need to make informed decisions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the questions. I'm just going to move on, and I realize it's a lot of information. I'm definitely not trying to make you experts, but trying to touch on the high points, I think, with some of each one of these sort of segments, and how even before you get to the insurance, there's some other things I think you just need to be aware of, So the regulations oh my gosh, that is a multi-day probably effort to dig into that, but just be aware that each community has a floodplain management ordinance. So just because you go to Queen Anne's County and they're telling you one thing, and then you go to Somerset County, you're hearing something else, there might be slight nuances to their different floodplain requirements. But, we're trying to get people to build higher, to elevate homes, because we can demonstrate the higher you go, you're going to save some money, and these are probably some old rates and will need to be updated. But the point being, the higher you go, the more you're going to save over a period of time. And you see these all the time. These are homes that are out there elevated on these block foundations like this with flood openings, or like this in Calvert County in a VE zone. Remember, we talked about VE zones, those velocity areas with wave action. So this one is open and has pilings. One of the components of regulations, and this does come up with agents from time to time, we'll get questions about this 50% rule, substantial improvement that their client might want to do. But, if the improvement or damage is more than 50% of the market value, there may be some triggers there. So, it's just something that comes up. It's a minimum requirement in the code. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the elevation certificate. It's a great tool that the community uses to ensure compliance, but it's also can be used for flood insurance rating. It can be used for to support letter of map change requests like LOMAs. But in Maryland, only a surveyor can certify as-built information. Okay. So before I turn it over to Rich, I just wanted to kind of step through a couple mitigation actions that we typically recommend, and maybe some bells will go off, some light bulbs will go off that, oh yeah, I have a client that if they do this, that'll help reduce their risk. So, things like flood damage resistant materials and flood openings and backflow prevention valves and HVAC utilities and elevating them, fuel tanks, accessory structures, and then this acronym: flood-proof, relocate, elevate, and demolish. So there's this clever acronym, in the mitigation world that we often use. But hey, flood insurance could really be a great mitigation action and tool. So when we say flood damage resistant materials, we're basically saying anything but drywall and your traditional fiberglass insulation. Use things that if they get wet, you could squirt them off and, it would be fine. You can get back to the way you were. But just don't use those kinds of things that once it gets wet, promotes mold growth, it gets soggy, it creates a lot of problems. So think about that as projects happen, as clients might come to you and be interested in doing improvements, that these kinds of things can help reduce risk. Flood openings, as probably many of you are aware, are these things that provide the ability for floodwaters to go below an elevated building. It reduces the hydrostatic pressure on those. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. But really, it's just to kind of try to balance out those floodwaters to reduce the stresses on the wall and eliminate any kind of foundation. But they're really, really important for a flood insurance standpoint, and will continue to be so. And risk rating 2.0 is another reason why I bring it up. But we don't want this to kind of happen where we've gone through the trouble of adding the flood openings and then they're covered up, because then it's just not operating as they should. And sometimes we get these subgrade crawl spaces, which we refer to as basements in flood insurance and NFIP world. So it doesn't matter if you can't stand up in it. If it's subgrade on all four sides, it is considered a basement, and it can lead to higher insurance. But backflow prevention valves, we see these a lot in urban settings and non-urban settings. Is there a way that you can prevent the floodwaters from backing up into the system? Toilets and sinks and floor drains and that sort of thing. The HVAC units, and you see these all the time, elevated on platforms. So the other part of this is elevating them is great, but also anchoring them for wind is something that we often forget about. And there's a lot of ways you could do it. You don't even just have to do platforms. You can build them up on a concrete block sort of foundation. If it's in a lower area, you could build a flood wall kind of around it, this sort of sealed area, and have a door. So there's a variety of ways that you could sort of protect utilities and not just have to elevate. But we do see things like this out in the field, and even accessing electric meters. They'll elevate those meters. Yeah. This doesn't happen all the time. You have to have a good partnership with the utility company, and also build them access to it, because they'll raise it as high as you want, as long as they're able to get to it. They have certain criteria they meet. But let's not forget about fuel tanks. Like oil tanks need to be anchored. The vent pipes need to be extended. Propane tanks also need to be anchored, because they can become buoyant and float. So we see these out in the field a good bit. And these are some shots from the Eastern Shore. So people are doing it. The manufacturers are doing it. But that's just kind of a nice thing, maybe a service you could provide to your client, is say, hey, you got this fuel tank out there. Maybe call your provider and make sure they anchor it if you're in a vulnerable area. Heating oil tanks is similar, except you extend the vent pipe. And let's not forget about our sheds in the backyard. Those do become buoyant as well. So they need to be anchored. They need to be vented with flood openings, and any kind of electrical and mechanical needs to be elevated. Or you get to a really extreme case where you actually elevate the structure. So people are starting to do this all over the state, and it takes time, it takes money, but it is possible. These are happening in very vulnerable communities. So I think that's kind of all I had for now. So I'm going to stop sharing there and see if we had any additional questions. And then I guess we'll kind of change gears here.
I think everybody had, or there were a couple, but Rich was going to cover those. So mostly about the elevation certificates and some other things that Rich will probably cover. So I don't see any other questions. So up to you, Rich.
And thank you. Thanks, Kevin. Chuck, Maryland Realtors, thank you for inviting us to be with you this afternoon. And I just want to thank each one of you for your time today. I'll try to make it worth your while. Let me take a moment to get my PowerPoint up. Of course, I've totally lost it at this point, so let's take two. All right. Bring it down. Technology, it'll get you every time. All righty. Excellent. So long story short, this is really all about probably the most transformational occurrence in the National Flood Insurance Program since I've been with the program, and that's about 30 years. It's called Risk Rating 2.0, and the Risk Rating 2.0 methodology will be taking the place of the system that we've always used, and I'll give you some side-by-side comparisons on that in just a minute. While I'm giving you a little background on the NFIP and Fema, just wanted to give you the message from the National Association of Realtors. Long story short, this program's been around since the late 1960s, and in the late 70s, we developed the rating system that we have been using up until very recently. It's served us well, but over that period of time, needless to say, there's been a lot of technological advancement. So one of the things that I can tell you about Risk Rating 2.0 is that it is far advanced over the old system in terms of allowing us to calculate accurate premiums, to show risk representation, and a lot of other things that we'll be going through in just a minute. But what's it all about? Since this is a federal program, FEMA does have certain statutory responsibilities. One of the things that we need to do is make sure that we set actuarially sound rates, and also we need to clearly communicate risk. And the clear communication of risk is really one of the things that's at the heart of this. One of the concepts I'll share with you is something called full risk premium. And full risk premium is basically what you think it would be. How much will it cost to insure any single individual structure? And that's always a good question. It's been a difficult hurdle for the most part in the past, leading up to resales. This system will make it so much easier because we do not need an elevation certificate to set your rates. The Equity in Action Risk Rating 2.0 works on the process of geolocation, and that geolocation process simply needs the property address. You or anyone else can get a quote on flood insurance for any individual property, and that process takes all of about 10 to 20 minutes. So the key person from here on in moving forward for you and for your clients is probably the insurance agent who will be able to quote that policy and service it for you. We did a very quick comparison of rates, and I'll share that detail with you in just a moment, but there will be some folks who actually save money as a result of our implementation of this new rating system. And last but not least, this process, as it plays out, which will take about 10 to 12 years actually, will bring us to a point where our rates are financially and actuarially sound, and we can move forward into the future on a firmer foundation. Kind of a side-by-side comparison of how we used to do things versus how we will be doing things. Over on the left-hand side, you can see a kind of another representation of a flood insurance rate map that Kevin let you take a look at. And under the old system, what we'll call the legacy system, structures that were located anywhere in that same high-risk zone, it didn't matter where they're located, pretty much got the same premium. No individual rates were available. It was a class rating, zone rating system. And as you can understand, different structures within that same zone really do represent different types of risk. So over on the right-hand side, you'll see that structure toward the upper right being nearer to the water source, that blue band of water is going to be more expensive under risk rating 2.0 to insure than the structure toward the lower left, which is further away. And that just makes common sense. So one of the things that risk rating 2.0 does is it's more intuitive. People, I think, can understand it better. The other thing that we really want to illustrate is the difference of how we treat structures that are inside and outside the high-risk map zones. Looking at the left-hand side there, you can see that there is a structure that is just outside the line and a structure that is just inside the line of the special flood hazard area. And because of the way we rated zone-wise, a significant premium difference, and let me just stop and say that the premiums here are for discussional purposes only. You cannot buy a flood insurance policy for $10, I'm sorry to say, but the difference really in the premiums between the structures is what's at the heart of the matter here. Over on the right-hand side, you can see those same structures in their placements. The premiums are much closer together because really the risk that these structures represent is also much closer together. How are we doing this? One of the things that we're doing is we are now rating on the basis of the replacement cost value. And I know a lot of you are familiar with replacement cost value, but basically it's what it says it is. Replacement cost value is if you have a structure which is lost, how much would it cost for you to replace that same structure with materials like kind and quality, et cetera, et cetera. Our legacy system, our old system, did not consider replacement cost value, and therefore we tended to charge pretty much the same premium for structures carrying the same amount of coverage, no matter what their replacement cost value was. And looking at the picture, you can see that structure over on the left-hand side, newer, larger, probably more expensive finished elements, versus that structure on the right, probably older, smaller, certainly, and having a lower replacement cost value. So calculating replacement cost value in now will tell us that we need to really charge more premium for that structure on the left because we're going to be paying more out should a flood loss occur. Another way of seeing that, excuse me.
Real quick, Rich, just to go along those lines, unless you were going to cover that.
Sure.
The question is, I think you talked a little bit about it in the chat. If you have similar homes in the same zone, one is elevated and one isn't, are they going to pay the same premium?
Yeah, and I'm real glad you asked that question. I do have some information on that. I'll share in just a moment. One of the things that I don't have is a slide that shows the elevation of a structure. And when you think about it, the best way to address the flood risk, the best way to keep yourself out of harm's way really is to elevate a structure, as the one we were looking at in Chrisfield. So the best way to reduce premiums under the National Flood Insurance Program is to elevate the structure. And the difference in risk rating 2.0 is no matter where that structure is located, inside, outside the high risk areas, we will provide pretty significant premium discount for the elevation of a structure. So that's the best way to go. I'll give you a couple more examples in just a little while. But again, back to the smaller and larger, less expensive versus more expensive structures here. You can see the comparison left and right there between how we've done things in the past versus how we will be proceeding under risk rating 2.0. We will charge more premium for a structure that has a higher replacement cost value. And again, just to give you a real quick side-by-side comparison, over on the left-hand side, our legacy system was based on the flood insurance rate maps, the zones, in some cases, the base flood elevations that Kevin referred to. And under the risk rating 2.0, we're taking a whole different look at things. We'll continue to use some of the sources of information we have used in the past, but we have added an awful lot more information. Some of that from other governmental agencies, some of those through commercial accounts. Replacement cost value has been part of the homeowners insurance package for a long, long time. So we're kind of stealing that idea from the homeowners insurance, and just a number of other variables that are going to make a difference in how we look at, calculate, and communicate risk. When does this happen? Well, it's already begun. Any new business policy for us that became effective on or after 1st of October has been rated using risk rating 2.0. And so we're closing in on 5-6 months down the road, and it's actually gone relatively smoothly. A couple of glitches here and there, but for the most part, it's gone pretty well. Kevin mentioned the key date of April 1st. As of April 1st, we will begin to rate our existing renewal policies using risk rating 2.0, and keeping in mind that our renewal offers need to go out 45 days in advance of a renewal date. There are some renewal offers already out there, and again, so far pretty quiet. We will rate rather our renewal policies using both the old and the new systems, and we will give our customers the lower of those two rates. So you can see we're trying to introduce this gradually. How will it affect Marylanders? Long story short, there's 2 bars shown there, national average and how this will play out in Maryland. And you can see that in Maryland, about 60% of the policies that we had in effect when we ran this analysis will see a premium decrease as a result. And I can tell you, under our old rating system, no one ever saw a premium decrease. It just wasn't geared that way. But now we're going to see a whole different way of looking at things. And so about 60% of Marylanders who are insured with us will see a premium break. About another 36% will see increase that is anywhere from $0 to $10 monthly. And keep in mind that under the old legacy system, the average premium increase for all of our policyholders was about $8 per month. So even in that category, most people are going to make out better because they'll see less than an $8 per month increase. What's not changing? If you're not aware of it, there are statutory rate caps on annual premium increases. So even those people who will be seeing premium increases, if they're going to be relatively large scale, those rates will tend to increase gradually. We will continue to make premium discounts available under risk rating 2.0. Probably the most important thing, old and new, the transfer of an existing policy is critical. And in terms of preparing for a resale, if the owner of the structure, present owner of the structure, does have a policy, that policy can be assigned from that seller to the buyer. It allows all the discounts that apply to that policy to carry over, makes sure that there's no break in coverage, and a seller can get a flood insurance policy prior to sale, and that way they will have that policy to transfer as of the date of sale. The use of flood insurance rate maps will continue for purposes of determining mandatory purchase and also for purposes of floodplain management. But I think, as Kevin has already stated, flood insurance rate maps won't be used for insurance rating at this point. Going forward, that's going to be through the geolocation process. Kevin also mentioned the community rating system, and Kevin's heading up the Maryland user group for community rating system, does a great job at it. And one surefire way to get premium discounts is for a community to participate actively in the CRS. The mitigation credits, as I mentioned before, flood openings can provide a premium discount. And that is true anywhere a structure is located, since structures can flood anywhere they're located. Another way of reducing premiums can be through the elevation of the machinery and equipment that is servicing the building. So both of those, keep in mind, some detail that goes along with it, but that is your basic information. And as I mentioned before, the community rating system is just an excellent way not only to make the community and its residents safer from the next flood, but it also provides for premium discounts. The challenge and the continuing challenge in the National Flood Insurance Program is all about affordability. Some people do struggle to be able to pay the premiums that are applicable to their structures. We continue to work with our partners in Congress to be able to institute some type of affordability framework. We'll continue to do that. The entire NFIP is up for reauthorization no later than September 30th of this year. And hopefully by then we'll have a good package of legislation to assist our property owners. In terms of resources, there's no end of resources out there. And again, more on that. We'll send you out copies of the slides so you can see what we have to offer for you. Last things for you. Again, the process is, I hope, I'm sure, going to be much easier as a result of the implementation of Risk Rating 2.0, elimination of the requirement for an elevation certificate, the ease at which a prospective buyer can purchase a flood insurance policy, even under short notice. Both of those things, I think, will go a long way to assist you and your clients. Since Kevin's already covered the mapping aspects of this, just wanted to let you know that everybody who has access, of course, to the internet can come up with no end of information to assist them. And we do feel that an informed customer is the best customer out there. Contact information, that's me up at the top. Also joining us on this call in a silent role is my partner, outreach coordinator, Maggie Dunn. And that does it for my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Great, thanks, Rich. You answered the one question about elevation certificates. What about contents? There's a question about our limit still 200 and 100,000 for contents. I'm not familiar with that.
Yep, that's correct. The building limit of coverage, statutory requirement of 250,000 for contents or personal property, statutory requirement $100,000. There's been talk in Congress and other places for some time now to increase those limits of coverage, but yep, that's one of the ones we were working on right now. Keep in mind that most losses are partial rather than total. Lost your sound, Chuck.
Can't hear you, Chuck. While Chuck's getting on, there is a question in the chat that says, do you need insurance for a pluvial flood?
A pluvial flood. First of all, what the heck is that? Second of all,
thank you to the questioner.
It was
All right.
pluvial and pluvial, two words out on the one slide. I was dying to know what they mean.
Somebody's been doing their homework, but at any rate, pluvial flooding is all the flooding that you're familiar with, you know, from rivers, streams, storm surge. Good for you. Pluvial, however, my limited understanding of French is ill good. It rains, and it's really all about the amount of rainfall that can fall in a very short period of time in a confined area. And if and when that occurs, that's going to lead to flooding. And we never took that into consideration under our old system of rating flood insurance. We will be going into the future. And thank you again for that question. First one that's ever been asked.
That's outstanding. Yeah. So another one, this is actually a good one from Robin. How does a seller assign an existing policy when they have it through their own insurance company and the buyer may have a different insurance company? That's an excellent question.
Good question. I would suggest that the Buyer, just allow the seller to let their agent transfer that policy. Again, that really does clean up a lot of potential issues. And somewhere down the road, perhaps at the actually at the next renewal, they can have that policy transferred from the current insurance agent to the buyer's flood insurance agent or company. They may even be able to do it before then.
Okay. So I don't see any other questions. I just wanted to share my screen just briefly. These guys touched on some of the resources, but I just wanted to share the National Association of Realtors and FEMA have partnered to provide this toolkit. This is an outstanding set of resources, and there you go down this list and there's, you know, all kinds of available resources. There's this one pager here that is actually pretty cool that you can share with your clients and customers. I don't know where it went, but anyway, oh, it's over here. It's a one page, and there are, actually it was in Rich's slide as well. So you can use that to hand your clients and just say, hey, you know, here's where you start. Here's what you need to know. Yeah, it's a lot, but this is nar.realtor flood. So if you can say, I don't think you can see that, or I can move that maybe. Yeah, there it is. That's a long URL, but if you just go to nar.realtor and click on flood insurance, you will get, they'll take you to this, the toolkit, okay? There is, like I said, look at these more resources than you could probably get through, but there are very, very good, and so please take advantage of that. And Kevin just put his email address on there, so thank you.
We have a couple of other questions that popped up.
Okay.
Robin asked, do we have to communicate with Asheron directly as an agent to get the assignment done?
I guess that would be this, the current owners or the seller's insurance company. That's a private company, right? So they sell the policy. I don't know, Rich, you have some insight on that?
Well, you know, while I think that transfer or policy assignment is probably the easiest way to do it, independent of that, the buyer can go to their current insurance agent,
right,
have a policy written up with the effective date of the sale, a date of transfer, and that's another way to do it.
Right. So you have two options: contact the current owners, call directly, and the answer is yes. You would call them directly. Say you have a current policy. Yeah.
The reason I suggest the policy transfer is that eliminates the possibility of discounts being lost that are currently applying to that property.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that, and because they already know the property and, you know, the history and whatever, so it might be easier. Kind of like when you get the reissue rate on a title insurance policy, if it's only been in effect for a certain amount of time. One other last question here, maybe getting back to elevation. Two adjacent properties, one spent the money to elevate, the other did not. Premiums will be different if same distance from water. I think the answer is yes, but.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so elevate, that's, Kevin, I love those slides too, where the openings and the hydrostatic pressure, you know, equalization and all those kinds of things are making really good progress. And those all do matter now that each individual property is being rated. This stuff matters even more, right? That's the message. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other interesting thing here is, again, FEMA's not using the maps for insurance rating purposes, but those outside can also get a reduction a little bit, you know, in things like elevating and using flood openings.
Great. Okay, well, that's our allotted time. We promised to finish at 2, and all questions have been answered. Everybody hopefully has access to the information. This is being recorded. The slides will be available as well. And so we appreciate everybody's time. Dan, you want to sign us off?
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Kevin, for your time, and thank you, Chuck, as well. This has been very helpful, and yes, we will be posting this webinar on our YouTube channel. and sharing the slide decks as well. So thank you, and stay tuned for our next webinar on March 30th, where our Director of Professional Development and Member Engagement, Colette Massengel, talks about implicit bias with an expert in that field. Until then, have a great day, and thank you for attending this webinar. Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks,
Thanks, Chuck.
Kevin.
Thank you.
Great job. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.